What if the very law meant to secure your country's borders was accused of giving them away? Back in 2009, the Philippines essentially redrew its own map, and it sparked this huge, fiery national debate that went all the way to the Supreme Court. So let's break down this high-stakes battle over baselines.
And at the heart of it all was this one really explosive question. Did this new law, which was designed to comply with international standards, actually cause the Philippines to surrender parts of its own territory? I mean, that was the accusation, and it was a seriously heavy one.
So, you gotta ask, how does a law that's supposed to secure your country's rights end up in the highest court in the land? Well, it all kicks off with one single piece of legislation.
Okay, so the catalyst here is a law called Republic Act 9522. Now, on paper, its purpose seems totally straightforward, right? Just get the country's borders in line with the big international treaty, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. You probably heard of it, UN clause. For any country with a coastline, getting on board with this treaty is, well, it's a huge deal. It's how you play the game on the world stage.
But here's the thing, almost right away, it gets challenged. We're talking a group of professors, students, even a legislator. They take this thing straight to the Supreme Court, and their argument? That this new map wasn't just some minor update. No, they claimed it was an unconstitutional surrender.
You know, this whole conflict didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's got some history. The original baseline law, that was way back in 1961. But then fast forward to 1984, the Philippines signs on to that huge sea treaty, UN clause. And suddenly that old 1961 law is, well, it's out of date. And that's what really set the stage for this new law in 2009, and of course, the huge Supreme Court battle that came right after.
All right, so let's really dig into what the challengers were arguing, because their claim was it was dramatic, and for a lot of people in the Philippines, it was really, really concerning.
So their whole case was built on this idea that RA 9522 just threw away the country's historic territory. And where did they get this idea of historic territory? From this massive rectangle drawn on a map way back in the 1898 Treaty of Paris, the one that ended the Spanish-American War.
So what you end up with are two completely different ways of looking at the country. On one hand, you have the challengers, who see the Philippines as everything, land and water, inside this giant historic box from an old treaty. But the new law? It takes the modern approach, the one UN close requires. It draws baselines connecting the outermost islands. And, as you can imagine, that creates a very, very different looking map.
And listen, they were not subtle about it. In their legal filings, they said the law literally dismembers the country. Dismembers. From their point of view, any piece of water, any island that fell outside these new, tighter lines, well, that was territory just given away. Gone. But then the case gets to the Supreme Court. And the justices, they look at all this and see a totally different story. They basically said, hey, the map isn't wrong. You're just misunderstanding what a map like this is for.
And their decision was unanimous. They said the petitioners had it all wrong. The court's reasoning was that this entire massive argument was built on a simple but fundamental confusion between two totally separate legal concepts.
Okay, first up, what even are baselines? So think about it this way. They're not like a fence around your property. Not at all. A better way to think of them is like a starting line in a race. Their one and only job is to give you a point to start measuring from, to measure a country's rights out at sea. They have nothing to do with defining what land you actually own. So what exactly are we measuring from that starting line? Well, we're measuring these incredibly valuable things called maritime zones. See, UN Close gives countries special rights in the waters off their coast. You get a territorial sea that goes out 12 nautical miles, and then, and this is the big one, you get a huge 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. And inside that zone, you have the sole right to all the resources. We're talking everything from fish to oil and gas. So here's the absolute crucial point the court hammered home. A baseline law is just a tool. It's a ruler for measuring these maritime rights. It has nothing to do with gaining territory or, and this was the big fear, losing territory. They're two different things.
Okay, but that still leaves a really big, kind of emotional question on the table. And the court had to tackle this one head on.
Right. What about the places everyone knows about? The Kalayaan Island Group, Scarborough Shoal, these disputed spots in the West Philippine Sea. If you look at the new map, they are clearly outside the main baselines. So, does that mean they were just left out? Abandoned?
The court's answer to that was a very firm no. In fact, they explained that trying to stretch the main baseline way out to grab those islands would have actually been illegal under international law. UN Close has really strict rules, you see. Your baselines have to generally follow the shape of your islands, and the lines themselves can't be crazy long.
And you can really see the strategy behind this when you hear from the law's sponsor, the late Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago. She basically said that if they had included those islands in the main baseline, they'd be breaking international law, and that could actually weaken the Philippines' entire claim. So instead of doing something illegal and stretching the baseline, the law did something way smarter. It gave these places a special classification, a regime of islands. Now, under UN Close, this special status does two amazing things. First, it explicitly says the Philippines has sovereignty over them. And second, and this is crucial, it lets each of those islands generate their own maritime zones. So it wasn't a surrender at all. It was actually a really clever legal move.
And this is where the story gets a really surprising twist. Because it turns out, the law that everyone was accusing of shrinking the Philippines actually did the complete opposite.
The court's final decision laid it all out in black and white with the actual numbers. And when you compare the old law to the new one, this startling truth comes out. The total area under Philippine jurisdiction didn't shrink, it massively increased. And why? Mostly because the new law formally established that huge exclusive economic zone we talked about. I mean, the final result was just stunning. Far from dismembering anything, this new law dramatically expanded the total sea area under Philippine control. And we're not talking about a small change here. This was a monumental gain.
The final number, a net gain of over 145,000 square nautical miles of maritime space. Just think about that. That's an incredible outcome for a law that started out being accused of giving territory away.
So, after all that, what's the big takeaway? What does this whole legal fight over lines on a map really mean? Well, the Supreme Court's ruling couldn't have been clearer. RA 9522 was not a surrender. It was a vital, strategic, and frankly necessary move to comply with international law. This was the Philippines putting a stake in the ground, solidifying its legal claims to its huge maritime resources for the entire world to see. In the end, you could say the battle over that old, misunderstood map was lost, but a much bigger prize was won. And that leaves us with a really critical question for today. Now that the Philippines has its maritime rights firmly grounded in international law, how can the country best use that legal victory to navigate the, let's just say, the very turbulent waters that are still ahead?